Just to get us started on the topic today, I went to a very small Bible college in East Tennessee, a little school in Knoxville, Tennessee called Johnson Bible College. It's now called Johnson University because they've gone big time. But literally this school was smaller. The entire student body was smaller than the graduating class of my high school class growing up in suburban Pittsburgh. So this is a tiny little school, right? And it had been established in the 1800s specifically to prepare their language preachers. In fact, the mascot of the sports teams at the college that I went to was the preachers, all right? Nothing strikes fear into your opponent, right? Like some guy in a suit running up and down the sideline of a basketball court, getting the crowd to cheer, right? That'll get you fired up. But anyway, this was not my choice. But most of the buildings on campus had been there long before I was born, frankly, long before my grandparents were born. And one of those older buildings was the dorms, especially the boys' dorms. The girls were a little nicer, but the boys not so much. And for most part, they were just sort of standard dorm rooms, very small, simple stuff, a desk, a fold-out bed, a closet. That was the extent of pretty much what you got, which was not a big deal. The big problem with these dorm rooms was they were shared by two guys, and in these old rooms, there were only 4 outlets in the entire space. And so you had the groan across. Everyone's feeling my pain. I'm feeling very, very supported here. Thank you very much. It was nuts, right? So not only were they not anticipating, I don't know what you were plugging in 1920, right? So you didn't have to think about this. But forget about, personal fridge, TV, stereo, all that kind of stuff, VCR, which we didn't even have DVD players, right? Forget the idea of computers or charging whatever you needed to charge. It was a real challenge. And so one of the most hotly valued, most treasured possessions in my dorm was one of these. In fact, it was more than just one of these. These would often be daisy-chained together into a complex web of power cords, right? All designed to try to somehow get power to all these things we could not live without. It was a fire marshal's nightmare, okay? But we were just dumb college students who were more concerned having cold Mountain Dew than whether we'd burn the place down, okay? So anyway, people would actually sort of envy one another's power cords, okay? You'd see people that had these ones with these huge long cords that could stretch all the way across the room and plug things in the middle. They would have how many different outlets there were, and did they have surge protectors? This is a very involved thing. But no matter how precious, how powerful that doofy thing was, no matter how many outlets there were, the surge protector, the length of the cord, or any of those kinds of things, there's a rather obvious functional truth about these things that you cannot deny. The most important end of a power cord is not this end, it's this end, right? Now, this is a very obvious and even sort of simple illustration. It's not original in any sense, I acknowledge that. The picture's fairly simple, but so is the truth we're going to talk about today. This captures in so many ways what it is we've been talking about in this series, and specifically what we talked about last week and what we're talking about this week. The end of the power cord that matters most is not all the stuff you plug into it, it's whether or not it's actually connected to anything that will give you the juice you need. It's a simple, obvious picture. And in this series, we're talking about what it means to get unstuck, to change. Because no matter who we are, no matter what we have, no matter where we're at spiritually, every one of us, as Scott said last week, stuck happens, and it happens to everybody. I don't care who you are. And we started by challenging each other to be very honest about some area of our lives where maybe you feel stuck or I feel stuck. Because we're about getting unstuck, about experiencing authentic, real, lasting kinds of change. Not just a sort of New Year's resolution, dig deep, try hard, live a little better for a little while and break some bad habits. We're talking about fundamental renewal, change at our deepest levels. And we're talking about doing it by learning from a movement that has traveled around the world, that has transformed millions of lives, the most effective addiction recovery strategy, research says, in the world. It's Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is documented of doing a better job of helping people find freedom from addiction than virtually any other recovery approach that's out there. And before you start to wonder, what did I suddenly walk into a giant AA meeting? Let me remind you what Scott helped us discover last week. That the principles of AA, the roots of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the 12 steps specifically, they flow directly from the teaching and the way of Jesus. I mean, Scott walked us through this last week, how the founders were so deeply rooted in faith, and they took what they saw in the Bible and crystallized it into these 12 steps to experience real transformation. So these things grow out of, they're rooted in, they would not have existed were it not for Jesus, were it not for his message, his gospel, his life and teaching. So if you weren't here for that foundation, we don't have time to go back through all that, but I urge you, I beg of you, go back, find it on northshore.church or grab it on the app and watch that talk. It's a fantastic talk that lays the groundwork really for this entire series. Now, before you think, what is he talking about? I'm not an alcoholic. I don't even really have any addictions. Before we go there, let's just pause for a moment. Because this is not just an idea for people who struggle with addiction. This is for all of us. It's for every one of us who knows what it's like to struggle, who knows what it's like to feel stuck. All of us who will honestly sit, sort of like someone would sit in a room of an AA meeting, and introduce themselves courageously and vulnerably and admit who they are. I'm Wolfgang, and I am a self-centered, self-righteous sinner. I struggle in all kinds of ways that I have not figured out how to manage on my own, and I've learned I can't. See, one of the fundamental beliefs we have is that God wants everyone to be free. God wants you to be free. God doesn't want anybody to be stuck. And he wants to partner, bring power into normal people's lives so they can taste that freedom. And so last week, we talked about this foundational step of the spiritual life. This step one, we admit that we are powerless over sin, our struggles, our selfishness, our darkness, our brokenness. We're powerless over our sin, and our lives have become unmanageable. In more familiar church language, we can't fix ourselves. It's just a starting point of the good news. Now, a lot of people know that in the Bible, the scenes we see as the Bible opens are a perfect creation. Then, of course, sin enters the picture. And this moment involves eating this forbidden fruit. Some of you may know the story. But what a lot of people don't realize, what was it that made this fruit so alluring to Adam and Eve? It wasn't just how good it looked or the certain variety it was. In the Bible, it describes this tempter saying, you want to know the reason God doesn't want you eating that fruit? He's holding out on you. Listen to what he says in verse 5. God knows that when you eat from it, from that tree, that fruit, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God. God doesn't want that for you. He's holding out. So eat this fruit so you can be like him. The very first sin, because it's really at the heart of every sin. I want to be God rather than let God be God. And so the very first step is to come out of denial and recognize I am powerless. Me living life my way is making a mess. And I have to stop playing God and just humble myself. I have a dear friend, and I've shared this in Starting Point and said in a lot of settings, but I've just come to believe this. When you boil it all down, he says there are two great realizations in life. One, there is a God, and two, you're not him. That pretty much if you get those two truths down, the other dominoes of life begin to click into place. But to actually get there, we have to begin by realizing we don't have what it takes to manage our lives or to overcome our sin or our darkness or our desires that rage inside of me just like they do everybody else. You can plug this thing into itself all you want. And you can plug in all sorts of extra accessories and appliances. Knock yourself out. A new book, a new seminar, a new teaching, a new group, a new conference. Plug those all in there. That's not what matters most. What matters most is it plugged into power? It's reaching a point of throwing your hands in the air and admitting, I don't know what to do. I can't fix myself. And if it's up to me, I am in trouble. If that is the last step, There is no hope, but thank God it's only the first step. But you can't bypass it. Because the second step then brings in the hope that we so desperately need. Here's what it says, what we're going to talk about today. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We came to believe. There's a process here, and sometimes that coming to believe is a brutal process. We'll talk about that more. We came to believe there is a power that's greater than who? Greater than me. And that power can take me places I can't get by myself. And to help us see this, I want to tell you the story of a man from the Bible. Some of you may know his name, you may not know his story very well. It's a man who's written about and talks there in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, many of us know it as. It's recorded in a book called Daniel. It's in Daniel chapter 4 specifically. And as I walk through this story, I just want to acknowledge up front, I am deeply indebted to another pastor, actually Scotty's old boss, John Ortberg, who taught through this passage in a way that just marked me, and I'm going to be sharing some of the same insights that I gained from listening to him teach as well. This is a story of a man who came to believe, who actually had his sanity restored in the most unbelievable, amazing way. And learning from him will help us do this as well. That you can do this week. The guy's name is Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe you've heard his name before. He was a super successful, uber high capacity guy, all right? Like many of the people in our room and in our community. Super high achievers, super gifted, super bright, really good at what he does. And his story, he begins telling it himself in Daniel chapter 4, verse 4. He's telling his own story. And here's what he says to open the narrative. I, Nebuchadnezzar, which there will be a spelling test after the service today. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. It's kind of the American dream. Apparently, it was the Babylonian dream too. Just like so many of us here on the east side of Seattle. Here I am in my palace, however many square feet it is, contented and prosperous, because I'm king. And life is pretty good when you're king. You step back and look over history. Many believe Nebuchadnezzar, one of the greatest leaders this world has ever seen. He's a courageous general. He's a charismatic leader. He's a prolific builder and architect. He is fabulously wealthy. He conquers basically the entire known world at his time, the great empire of Babylon. You've probably heard of. Anybody heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? Nebuchadnezzar built them. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. His wife was homesick for the mountain gardens of her hometown, and so he built one of the 7 wonders of the world for his wife as a birthday present. Now, my wife's birthday's in a couple of weeks. She'll be lucky if I weed, all right? I'll just be honest with you, let alone build her some garden like this. Anyway, this is just one of his construction projects. There are hundreds recorded. Some of them still even preserved, believe it or not. History tells us he surrounded his capital city of Babylon with a double wall 20 miles long, doubled up. In its day, it was the greatest city on earth. I mean, this guy is untouchable. He is the greatest human being alive, and he knows it. I was contented and prosperous in my home, he says. No kidding, you're the greatest man in the world. You have everything anyone could want. You're the most famous, most powerful person on the planet. Everyone in the known world looks to you as their leader and relies on you for protection and what they need to live. The trouble's coming. Verse 5, Nebuchadnezzar says, I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in my bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I want to tell you about this dream. See if you can figure out why it might have freaked him out just a bit, all right? See, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he sees this enormous tree. And this tree, it represents something, somebody, as dreams often do. It's the greatest tree in the world. The top of this tree reaches to the heavens. The branches of this tree extend throughout the known world. Every creature depends on it for its food and its shelter. Anybody want to take a stab at who this tree represents? I'm going to tell you a story just a little out of order, so stick with me if you're actually following along in your own text. I want to jump down to verse 13 as he describes some of this dream. It says, "In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger, coming down from the heavens. He called in a loud voice, 'Cut down that tree.'" That's not good. "Trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him," and again, anybody want to guess who him might be in this? "Let him be drenched in the dew of heaven." In other words, sleep outside. "Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him." Verse 17, "The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know," so that they may know what? Catch this. "They may know that the Most High, power even greater than this great Nebuchadnezzar, the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of people." This is not a subtle dream. It's pretty obvious what this dream is about. Judgment is coming for Nebuchadnezzar. It would take a genius, it wouldn't take a genius, would it, to decode this dream, right? It just takes somebody with some guts. Somebody willing to stand before the king and say, "Your Majesty, I'm not sure how to say this, but this is not a good dream." So he calls some people to do that. Verses 6 and 7. "So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me." Gosh, king, I don't know. This is a head scratcher. I'm not sure. You may not want to do any tree trimming for a little while. I'm not exactly sure though, right? Now, in 12-step kind of recovery language, this is called enabling, is what this is. You just allow someone to go on in their stuckness. You just sort of, "Oh, your life looks like a mess. I have no idea why. That fools me." You just allow them to go on in their stuckness, in their problem, in their pain. Why? Because to say something might be awkward. It might be uncomfortable, both for you and for them. They might get mad at me. I don't want to have to be the one that tells them this. Maybe it'll just fix itself. Maybe someone else will take care of it. I'll just sort of pretend it's no big deal. Maybe it's your kid. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a friend. I don't want to cause problems. Well, it's not my business anyway. Just be a hassle. I don't want to have to confront them. That's what's going on here. Friends, have you learned that sometimes it takes far more love to tell somebody the truth than it does to pretend there's no problem? Sometimes that isn't love at all. So Nebuchadnezzar in this story does a lot of nasty things, but he does get this one thing right. He has someone in his life who will tell him the truth, and that man's name is Daniel. Daniel has no problems interpreting the dream for Nebuchadnezzar, of course, and then with great savvy, he tells the king of the trouble that's on its way. And then he adds a little advice, just to boot. Down in verse 27, Daniel says, "Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice." What's this advice? "Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed." Now again, in 12-step recovery language, this is called an intervention. Daniel now is doing an intervention with the king of Babylon, the most powerful man on earth, at tremendous personal risk. Because you remember, this is the same Nebuchadnezzar who exiled Daniel and his people from their home, who threw Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, into a fiery furnace. Some of you know that story. This took great courage for Daniel to do this, to say, here is my advice, O king. Stop sinning, change your ways, renounce your wickedness. And then, as a sort of preview of the steps that we now have, he says something like this. Then do step 4. Take a fearless and searching moral inventory. We'll get to that in the coming weeks. Then maybe, O king, try out step 5. Admit to God, yourself, and one other person. It could be me. I'll be your sponsor, king. That's fine. The exact nature of your wrongs. Then, I don't know, maybe step 8. Make amends to other people, like the poor you've been oppressing. Because I'm telling you, king, judgment is coming. Reality is on its way. And so the king listens to Daniel, and he thinks to himself, well, maybe. But you know what? I'm not convinced. So let's just see what happens. I'm not at the end of my rope yet. My life's pretty good. I'm living here in the castle. I think I can handle a lot more pain. In fact, I can handle whatever comes my way. Protect myself with my giant wall. See, this is the way people think. Crisis might strike in other people's lives, but not me. I've built myself in such a way, I'm stronger than many. I got lots of stuff, lots of resources. I can cope, I can manage. And so he says he waits. Then the next day, nothing happens. Then the next day, nothing happens. Eventually enough days pass that maybe Nebuchadnezzar even forgets the dream. Maybe he just chalks it up to some bad falafel or something. Who knows? Till a year goes by, and he's back to his old self. Look at verse 29. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence? Who did it? By my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty." In other words, I am the man. Look what I've done. Look at my portfolio. Look at this house. Look at the vacation place. The boat and RV and storage. Look at all this I have. Mine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. So, I don't know, maybe he whips out his phone, takes a quick selfie there to mark the moment. And he's just about to post it on the royal Facebook page when this happens. Verse 33. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven, homeless in other words, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of the bird. I mean, this is Howard Hughes type stuff going on here. And we're not exactly sure how it happened. Maybe it was some sort of psychotic break. Maybe there was some sort of process. We don't know exactly, but sometimes this can happen suddenly. Sometimes things unravel slowly. This seems to have happened very quickly. And in 12-step recovery language, this is called hitting bottom. I used to be king of all that I see, and then smack right into reality. See, here's the truth about Nebuchadnezzar. No matter how great he was never really in control. He couldn't keep himself sane. He probably didn't even really have a friend. He didn't have the power to keep his own mind thinking straight. He didn't have the power to control his body, which is now doing things that he would not have it do. He lost all of it in a second. Here's what's amazing. He hits rock bottom. It's a disaster, a train wreck. And look at what he says in verse 34. At the end of that time, we're not exactly sure how long, but at the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. It's like 12-step language long before anyone dreamt of it. I came to believe there's a power greater than me. I looked up. I never thought there was. I thought I was it. But I came to believe it in a very painful way. I came to realize I'm not in control, and there is a power out there greater than myself, and it can restore me to sanity. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion, not mine. His kingdom endures from generation to generation, not mine. Now jump down to 37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, not that he's familiar with this, those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. And Nebuchadnezzar miraculously experiences low self-esteem, but in the beautiful, best way. See, here's the thing about him. Interestingly, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian. He's not an Israelite. He doesn't have the scriptures. He doesn't even know God's name. He's not a child of Abraham. He knows almost nothing he's supposed to believe about God. All he now believes is there is something beyond himself he needs to find out about. There is a power greater than myself. There's a power, this critical phrase, greater than myself, which think about how hard that must have been for a man of his achievements and position. To be humble enough to admit you're not all that, and that there is more. Friends, that's where freedom is. There is a power greater than me, and he is strong enough to help me, and he might even be compassionate enough to come along my side and show me the way. It's a three-part story. It's a story of many of our lives. In the first part, Nebuchadnezzar is insane, but he doesn't feel any pain. So he doesn't even realize he's insane. He's just proceeding with life as he thinks it's supposed to go. All these thoughts flowing around in his mind every day. I'm in control. I'm accountable to nobody. I am my own. I am the man. I generated my own success, and therefore I deserve it. I can be king as long as I want. This is my stuff. My power is my power. My life is all about me. I am an exceptional human being. And other weaker people out there might be vulnerable. Thank God I'm not one of them. Other people might have problems, but I'm different. I'm an exception. Friends, that is insane. But it's the world we live in. And it's not just alcoholics. It's not just addicts. It's not just Nebuchadnezzar. Some people, so many people, are convinced they're in control. People in this room, even who would call themselves followers of Jesus, still think they're in control. It's exactly what the Apostle Paul wrote a long time ago when he's talking about people living apart from God. Romans 1:21, he says, "For although they knew God," people who claim to know God, "they neither glorify him as God nor give thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their hearts, foolish hearts, were darkened." Nebuchadnezzar moves to the second part of his story where he is now insane, but there's pain. See, when you hit bottom, it hurts. Some of us in this room can tell you. There's nothing fun about it. But there is a strange, painful gift that's hidden in that hurt that might actually be the doorway to freedom. To recognize, wait a second, I'm not in control. All this stuff isn't my stuff. And my desperate attempts to hold my life together, to keep everything neat and tidy just like I want it to be, is killing me. My reputation and my fame and my glory and having everybody think I'm awesome, even though I know the truth deep down inside, that is not bringing me joy at all. It's killing me. And so that's why so often, and this is a crazy thing, so often I've seen it happen over and over again. I've experienced it in levels in my own life. Somebody goes through something where they get exposed, where the truth about them that they've worked hard to disguise is suddenly revealed. And you'd think that it would just crush them. But the crazy thing that seems to happen is that there's this moment of freedom when you don't have to pretend anymore. I'm free. I didn't realize that was enslaving me, that thing that I was holding so tight. I am not in control, and I don't have to be. See, this is the worst thing that ever happened to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's the best thing that ever happened to him. And it's interesting, it says, he raised his eyes toward heaven. You're God, not me, and I'm so glad you are. There is a God, and I'm not him. His eyes are raised toward heaven and his sanity is restored. Then he said, I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him. This is even before Nebuchadnezzar ever gets his job back. And he's not king yet. He already feels, though, this sense of relief that comes with humility. There is a power greater than me, and I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to be small and quit trying to be so big. And here Nebuchadnezzar discovers he would rather have his new mind with none of all that stuff he had before than to live in that luxurious palace and still live the insanity he'd been living. This is a tough step. And I know this is a challenge for a lot of people, even people in the church. They say, I'm not sure I believe that. I'm not sure what I believe. I've struggled to change. I've plugged into everything I could find. Connecting with some power I can't see, depending on some mystical force to do something I haven't been able to do on my own. I don't know what that means. I'm not even sure I believe that. Sounds too easy. Can I just tell you something? Step 2 is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. It all boils down to this word of surrender. In our self-reliant, dig deeper, try harder world, a culture that is defined by a document called the Declaration of what? Independence. We need nobody. The path to freedom only comes through a declaration of dependence. Looking up to heaven and saying, God, I'm not sure I understand all this. I'm not even sure you're on the other end of this, but I know I can't do this on my own. So I make a declaration of dependence. I give up. Simple but not easy. And it's not just our independent culture. Many people aren't sure there is any kind of power beyond this. And maybe you're here and you're thinking, I don't know if there is a God, if I'm not sure what he or she or it is even like. And if that's you, here's what I'd ask you to consider. I don't expect you today to say, yes, you've convinced me. All I'm asking you to do today is at least say maybe. At least say maybe. And then begin to search. Many of you know this week we're starting a new experience at North Shore called Alpha. I'm so excited about it. It starts Thursday. It's actually been around a long time. Millions of people around the world have gone through this, and it's primarily designed as a place for people who aren't sure what they believe and are wrestling with these kinds of questions. And this Thursday, we're launching it. The topic is there more to life than this? And we'll have dinner together. We'll watch a video to get us thinking, and then we'll have a conversation. I'll be there. I would love it if you would be there too. And you can either write Alpha on your connection card if you didn't already drop that in the offering buckets and throw those in the boxes as you leave, or you can go to northshore.church/alpha. And you can RSVP there just so we can make sure we've got enough food, and children's ministry is available if you need that as well. Just got to let us know. Or maybe you're ready to dive deeper. Brian mentioned earlier these authentic living groups where people are working their way through some of these sorts of steps. It's a group that meets on Monday nights from 6:30 to 8:30. And you can just show up tomorrow night. It meets in the portable, which is outside the building on the street side, over on the side there. You've seen it if you've driven out this side of the building before. That portable at 6:30 tomorrow night, you can just show up. And then next week, we'll take another step down this path. We'll look at the step that could transform your life. And if you know anybody that isn't sure what the message of Jesus is, or isn't quite sure what to do with all of this, invite them next week. We're already praying, Scott's already preparing for an incredible Sunday of just clearly challenging us all to evaluate what step 3 looks like in all of our lives. And I hope you'll be here for it. Because we are a community of people who are learning to say, I admit that I am powerless over sin and that my life, trying to live it my way, unmanageable. And I have come to believe there is a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. Many of us have discovered that power. And it isn't some unknowable, mysterious force. That power is personal. That power put on skin and bones and lived like every one of us. That power went through the same pressures and stresses and desires and exhaustions and frustrations as all of us. But he showed us there's another way to live. And that power, become a person, is Jesus. And not only did he model this new kind of life, he laid his own life down so you could have a new one. And to show you just how spectacular the power is at the end of this cord, he raised from the dead with the same power that can raise you from the craziness of what passes as life in our world into the sanity of the life God has in mind. To find freedom, to get unstuck, to experience new life. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to remember that by eating what's called the Lord's Supper or communion. For centuries, people have eaten this little meal as a reminder of the power that behind this universe became a person. And that person defied all expectation by living the life of a servant, even going so far as to lay himself down for all of us, to die on a cross, to be raised then from the dead, as we just celebrated at Easter and Good Friday. And so we're going to eat bread and juice that reminds us of those symbols, his body, his blood, that is the pathway to new life. It is the plug into which we attach ourselves. And we're going to remember that through communion. And so as the trays are passed, just feel free to eat it as it goes by. You can hold it for a moment if you'd like, but feel free to eat it when you're ready. In just a moment, ushers are going to come and pass those trays. The band is going to lead us in a few songs as we respond and reflect. But first, would you bow your head with me? Let's pray together. And Father, so many live in this illusion that they are in control. I struggle with it. That feeling just isn't natural, God. I want to be in control. And yet I'm reminded of rock bottom moments in my life when I've realized this is all beyond my control. This is crazy. I need something bigger than me. I don't have what it takes. And so, Lord, I thank you for being that power, for showing yourself faithful, for being patient. When coming to you, admitting our weakness, instead of being slapped on the wrist and sent away and scolded, you instead embrace us. You call us home. You offer us new life. And so those of us who've been touched by that, we're going to eat this meal as a sort of declaration of dependence. And many of us, we're going to commit that each day of our lives, we're going to begin the day with a declaration of dependence. I have come to believe there is a power greater than me that can lead me to sanity. I look to you as that power, Lord. And Father, for those in this room who aren't sure they believe any of this, I pray that in these quiet moments as they let the trays pass, that they'll just consider, what would maybe look like? Maybe. Oh God, show yourself. Move as only you can. Set us free. I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.